everyone, Tammy here. Welcome to another episode in my Blythe Sewing Basics series. One of my videos already talks about the basics you need as far as tools to sew for your Blythe dolls. However, sewing, like many crafts, lends itself to lots and lots of tools, especially specialty tools. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some specialty tools that I use in addition to the basic tools, as well as notions. All right, so before I get too far into this, let me just mention I have some bruises on my hands and arms, so please just don't get totally freaked out. We have a new puppy in the house, and yeah, I'm trying to leash train him, and we had a little bit of an accident the other day where he pulled really hard, and yeah, almost fell over, so... One of my first videos for this series in Blythe Sewing Basics, I talked about tools, the basic tools you need. And one of them I mentioned was a tape measure. And I still think these are super handy. You have metric on one side typically and regular inches on the other side. But another measuring tool I tend to use quite a bit is a yardstick. And they tend to be fairly inexpensive. I have seen these, for example, at places like Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart. I'm in the U.S., so I know, that's U.S. centric, but that's where I shop. So, but a lot of big box type stores will have these, and they're usually just a few dollars. A lot of craft stores obviously will have them as well. What's handy about this as opposed to the tape measure is that if you want to draw a line, it's hard, so you can just, say you're going to measure off, 10 inches for a Blythe skirt. Here you go. You can just take the pen and just mark it there. So it's kind of handy since it's hard and this is flexible. Another additional tool, and I say tool with quotes around it because obviously a notebook might not be considered a tool, but for me, it's a really important part of my sewing. I actually even stitched together a little cover for my notebook here, but this is just a regular, Mead notebook. That's the here, like there it is. It's just cardboard and ruled inside, and I use this to make notes. I use it for things like if I'm going to make measurements or something. Like here's something some notes. I was doing some tote bags, and I have a little post-it note here, the measurements, and I made some tote bags and I sold a few. And as I started to think about it, I was curious, like how long was this tote bag actually taking me to make. It took me almost 2 hours. So needless to say, I'm not selling them anymore. So then I was making some children's skirts for my grandnieces. So at the time I was measuring out, they were just little elastic waist skirts. So this is what I measured out for them. And I have them in my notes. Now they're big girls, so these are probably not the right size for them anymore. But anyway, whenever I do any type of sewing and I need some notes, like here's one for my tote bag, actually how to make my tote bag, which, I still make it sometime, usually as a gift, but I wrote down how to do it. Or even if I'm using somebody else's pattern, I might make notes about it. I also stitch out really horrible designs. Like here's one this is for when I was doing the Snow White collab with Marna at Dolls Rescue. This is one of the outfits that I made. Obviously, I am not Beth Ramsden when it comes to sewing, but this helps me sort of think out my design process a little bit. So I would recommend having a notebook dedicated to sewing and have a little pen ready so you can make notes as you do things, and later on you can refer to it when you possibly make that item again. I've actually shown this gauge ruler on some of my videos already, but I wanted to mention it again. It's very, very handy. In particular, when you want to make sure you have a measurement, like say, for example, you want to measure something at 1.5 inches, and you want to make sure that the whole thing is going to be 1.5 inches, you can put this little slider there, and then your fabric, you measure it down. It's just kind of like a place marker on your ruler, so to speak. So this is super handy. Again, this is usually around $1.50 or so I've seen at places like Walmart. Very inexpensive. You can also pick these up on Amazon, and most crafting type stores have these sort of gauge rulers for anybody that's looking for this. So in my first video where I talked about tools, one of the things I said that you would obviously need are straight pins, but I also find these little clips to be super helpful. Sometimes you have something that you just want to clip a couple pieces of fabric together and you don't necessarily want to pin everything. These are just super handy for that. They're, again, not super expensive. I can't remember. I got this whole tin for like, maybe I think it was like $10 or something. So again, these are not like you have to have these tools in order to be able to sew. These are additional tools that I find handy and I recommend. All right, so this little wooden crochet hook, it's a bamboo crochet hook. Obviously, it is useful for crochet. It's a size J clover hook. I use this a lot for when I'm turning things inside out and I want to, you know, poke in the sides or, you know, get something, push some fabric around inside something. This is helpful. You could also use chopsticks, but what I like about this is one side is kind of blunt and one side is pointed, but not super crazy pointed. That's the bamboo ones are not quite as pointy as, say, a aluminum crochet hook. So anyway, I use this a lot for things like that, especially when I'm turning things inside out. You could also, like I said, use possibly a chopstick as well. That would probably also do quite well for that purpose. And speaking of turning things inside out, I have a pair of bent nose jewelry making pliers. I also make jewelry. I have for many, many years made jewelry. In fact, that was like my main hobby there for many years. And I have some jewelry making books out and stuff like that. So I have quite a few tools that I use for making jewelry. Well, the bent nose pliers, these are really handy when I have to turn something inside out. Also, if you don't have a pair of bent nose pliers, another alternative that I've seen a lot of people use successfully for that is a pair of hemostats, because basically you can, you know, put your piece of fabric in between here, hold onto it and pull it through. So yeah, bent nose pliers and or hemostats, definitely recommend getting some of those. You will find them very useful. Obviously you need a good pair of scissors, but this little roller cutter I find also useful, especially when I want to make lots and lots of dresses. Like sometimes I have an assembly line going on and I want to make, you know, half a dozen dresses at the same time. This can be really useful. Obviously, it is super sharp. So needless to say, be careful with this. If you get one of these, you will also need to get a mat. There's a special type of cutting mat that usually you can pick up at the same time when you get one of these. Again, I've seen these, let's see, I've seen these at Michael's, Walmart, again, Amazon. You can pick these up at a lot of different places. This is one of the smaller, this is 45 millimeter. And this is a pretty decent size. They come bigger, but I wouldn't get anything bigger than 45 millimeter because you have little nooks and crannies sometimes that you want to get around in. So this and a cutting mat are very helpful. Fray check is something else you've seen me already mention before, but I'm going to mention it again. I kind of use a combination. Sometimes I use fray check to finish edges. Sometimes I use a zigzag stitch. It kind of depends. If it's a small area, I tend to use fray check. If it's a larger area that is very, especially if it's something very straight, I tend to use the zigzag stitch on my machine. This again is not super expensive. Also, before you use it, I would recommend doing some Googling, and definitely on YouTube. There's quite a few videos, believe it or not, on how to use fray check, and I have found them very helpful. So do a search on YouTube for how to use fray check before you start using this, because it's very, you can see it's very liquidy and it can kind of go all over the place. I also usually put a piece of wax paper down and put my fabric on top of it, so when I use fray check, so it doesn't stick on everything, because it can be sticky. So obviously it's super handy to have the doll that you plan to sew for, whether she's a Blythe doll, you know, in this case I'm talking about how to sew for Blythe, but a lot of my suggestions and ideas can obviously transfer over to different types of dolls. But definitely I use these dolls in my little studio. In fact, here is my Amy. She is actually one of the dolls that I use in my sewing studio to model an outfit. And this outfit, in fact, that she's wearing, the skirt is one video and the top is a second video that is part of my Blythe Sewing Basics series. So again, plugging that. But sometimes it can be a hassle because of their big heads, okay? So if you have a couple of extra bodies around, doll bodies, it can be very useful. This is a traditional doll body. You can pick these up from AliExpress. And again, they're not crazy expensive. They're definitely not as much as an entire doll, that's for sure. And if you're doing any type of customization and everything, sometimes this is one of the things you might do is actually switch out a doll body. So I have a traditional one here. And then here's one, the fakey one. I even took the hands off. And I just kind of leave the hands off because sometimes when you're sewing, you know, you want to just put the outfit on real quick to see, you know, how is it fitting? Is it tight? Is it loose? Is it long enough? And you don't always want to be taking the hands off all the time. So yeah, so having a couple of extra doll bodies around is like a mannequin type of thing. Very handy to do. As long as you have a doll, you're good. Again, this is just extra stuff that I find useful to have. And then this is a really odd little tool. And I've seen this used on a few videos, and I can't remember specifically the channels. But it's called the purple thing, and it's got a sort of spatula sort of end on one end. This little hole, I have no idea what that does, and then the other end is sort of like a little curved and pointed. You can use this a little bit sometimes if you're turning something inside out and you're pushing, but just be careful. It is pretty pointy, so you can sometimes accidentally poke through something. Mostly I use this end. And you can see I've actually accidentally hit my needle on it a few times. But the idea is that every once in a while, you will be sewing and you might have something that's a little bit on the thick side and you're trying to get it through underneath your presser foot and it's just not sucking it up. And again, don't force and jam things because then you'll just ruin your machine. But sometimes you just need a little gentle nudge. And this is perfect for that. It's again, these are very inexpensive and you usually get, I think you get like half a dozen of them in this package. So the purple thing is useful. And finally, the last tool that I'm going to talk about today is the good old seam ripper. Needless to say, you will probably need this. Doesn't matter how experienced you are with your sewing. We all make mistakes and the seam ripper is super handy. Sometimes you just have to rip stuff out and start over again. So definitely get yourself a seam ripper. All right, so now I'm just going to talk briefly about a few notions that I think are useful to have on hand. Ribbon is one. You can see here, this is just a little simple A-line dress I made, and I thought it would be cute to have a little belt, so I just cut a little bit of ribbon and I whipped it around her. This ribbon here is, what is it? It is 3/16 of an inch or 5 millimeter, and it's a pretty decent size for Blythe dolls. You can also use ribbon for making straps. So like this little top that I made, it is part of a project, a no pattern required project that is in my Blythe Sewing Basics series, and I used this exact ribbon and made it into little straps here and then tied it in the back, halter style. All right, so I'm not saying go out, run out and buy a bunch of ribbon, but if you see it on sale, it's probably a good idea to kind of have a little bit in stock so you have it handy. And I would say anywhere from 3/16 of an inch or 5 millimeter down to maybe even a little bit thinner is a good size, generally speaking, for most of your needs. Also use it as trim and take some of this, place it on your fabric and stitch it on to add some embellishments. I keep a lot of my little notions in this little zipper pouch, and so some of the other ones that I recommend having on hand are little bows like this. You can usually pick these up in the wedding area of most craft stores. They're really a nice size for Blythe dolls. I use them a lot to just add maybe around the neck, or you could add it on a skirt. They're just sweet, very easy, inexpensive, and definitely worth kind of having a stash of those. And then, of course, lace. You want to make sure you have some lace, and I have a little bit of stashed lace here. One of the things you have to be careful about is getting the right size. So like something like this would work okay on if you want to trim a skirt. If you want around the neck, it might be a little bit on the large size, so just keep that in mind. Like here's some lace that I purchased, and it's really too big for Blythe dolls. You can see how white it is. I'm sure there's a way I could use it. I could use it like maybe on a skirt if I wanted a big lacy area. But yeah, think of the, you know, again, the dimensions, the proportions of your dolls as you're looking for these. Here's some other cute little, again, I found these now in the scrapbooking section, I believe, and they're sticky. There's like a little sticker thing. But what I tend to do is I will, instead of just relying on the sticker, I will actually hand stitch these. And these are also really nice little embellishments. So that is something handy to have. So yeah, little embellishments, ribbons, bows, things like that. Look in the scrapbooking section, and also look in the wedding section. And then finally, an important item to have as far as notions is some sort of way to secure the clothing onto the dolls. So I would recommend getting some snaps. These are the Drits 12 sewn on snaps. There's a front and a back to these, and that's the size that they are right there, 4/0. These particular snaps. And then also Velcro. I'm not a big fan of Velcro, but it's handy to have some. And these are small little dots, so they're glued on. And there's a lot of different types of Velcro. Some Velcro is stitched on, so you just got to figure out what works for you. All right, everyone, that's it. I'm going to wrap it up here. If you have any questions about any of the items that I mentioned here, or any that I haven't mentioned, and you want to include them in the comments below, let me, just go ahead and add them, and I'll do my best to answer your questions. Please make sure you hop over to the playlist Blythe Sewing Basics if you haven't already. I have a number of videos in there, and I will be adding more. And as usual, I always appreciate a thumbs up, and please subscribe if you haven't already, and have a wonderful dolly day. Bye-bye.